Hello, welcome to another episode of SaaS Scaled, and I'm pleased to have Fred Koopmans with us as our guest. He's a CPO or Chief Product Officer at BigPanda. Fred, welcome to our show.
Thank you so much, Armand. Really appreciate taking the time to speak with me.
Uh, Fred, tell us a little bit about yourself, your story.
Yeah, happy to. So, kind of a engineer by trade. I've been in and around the product area here in Silicon Valley for a little over 20 years. Kind of started in networking equipment and then moved to traffic management and then big data platforms. And currently, I'm working in AI operations, so kind of applied artificial intelligence, which has been a lot of fun. Beyond work, I live in the Bay Area with my wife and four daughters.
Fantastic. And at BigPanda, what kind of problems you are solving? What does the company do?
Yeah, thank you for the question there. It's a very interesting problem. We provide a service that helps businesses keep their digital services running, essentially help keeping the digital world up and running 24 by 7. Specifically, we serve the IT operations teams. These are the folks that are responsible for keeping these digital services running all the time. So I'll give you a few examples. If you take like an airline company, they have hundreds of applications that all are mission critical for their business. So whether that's the website or the check-in app, bag tracking, even just like the detecting the food delivery to each airplane, all of those services have to be running in order for the planes to be flying. And there's a team, like an IT operations teams, whose job it is to monitor all of those. And when things go wrong, not if, because when, things are breaking all the time, they need to jump onto it and route it to the right place to get it fixed as soon as possible. So whether you're an airline or a bank or an insurance company, there's just like every business these days has some form of critical digital services that the team is increasingly kind of put on the hot seat to keep running. So we serve that customer base.
Okay, interesting. And then I do remember when we had a discussion before. There were a number of topics that came up, and so definitely I'm pretty sure there is no shortage of topics to discuss. But the one that I would like to bring it up and start with, maybe out of all of those, would be something that you have experience working with a company or with companies that they had software not running in SaaS, but just
Mhm.
not yeah, on-premise kind of software, right? So you develop the application as it used to be 20 years ago, and then the application, the software is on-premise, and now you're working with a company that is designed from the ground to be really SaaS. And then, that is probably changing a lot of things. But what are the major items from your perspective that SaaS has changed the software industry, the role
Mhm.
of IT? What are those components? How do you see it the way, SaaS changed? Not just because it's subscription revenue or it's from outside. We are using SaaS, we just go there and we don't deploy anything as a user. It's easier for us to sign up and start using it. But I'm talking about internally. If you look at it from inside, what are
Yeah.
the things that have changed?
It there's a lot of angles to the question, so excited to explore this here with you. Um, I'll start with it's sort of well known at this point that there was the kind of the CIO buying era, and then that led to maybe the VP of IT, and then now it's the end users. So it's end users that are kind of making the decisions and driving a lot of the purchasing within large enterprises these days. From kind of an internal perspective, the way I've seen that manifested, specifically, let's say just within the IT operations area that Big Panda serves, is that as that happened, the centralization kind of broke down, and the power went out into the business units, and there were a host of vendors there to serve them. And all of that kind of changed the world dramatically. So you have, with the cloud, of course, the rise of on-demand elastic computing at very granular kind of infrastructure. So all of a sudden you have an explosion of the number of servers and the variability of those servers that are out there running that company's applications. Additionally, there was another trend that happened, and maybe it's not exactly because of SaaS, but coincident with it, which is a transition from kind of monolithic applications, sort of like very big, kind of the traditional on-prem monolithic at least, to microservices. So what that does is it increases the number of services that need to be monitored and kept online, by an order of magnitude, possibly even more. And then next you have CI/CD. It's a fundamental change to the way that we develop software. So continuously integrating all of your small granular check-ins and then deploying them into the system. The idea there is like, let's catch problems much quicker rather than dumping months worth of changes all at once. Um, well, as you can imagine, that's like an order of magnitude or two of more opportunity for things to break, okay, through this
Mhm.
new process. You're constantly making changes, like the time frames of which you can break something happens much more frequently. And then you have DevOps. Okay, another big
Mhm.
trend here. So this is sort of a regrouping of taking sort of some component of an operations teams and then combining that with the development team. And they're typically like the, let's say, the second line or third line responders, not typically the first line, kind of available, staffing the system 24/7. But that explosion created a whole new suite of tools. And what that kind of
Mhm.
manifests itself as 10 times more data silos. So they each have their
Mhm.
own monitoring tool just for their application, but all siloed away from the central tool. Um, and then you have the pandemic. Okay. And the
Mhm.
pandemic did this massive acceleration of digitization. So the first year alone, I've heard people say, brought forward, at least like 6 years worth of digital transformation. And
Mhm.
the impact to the IT team is, while they were losing control step by step by step, they weren't purchasing these things, but they were still
Mhm.
responsible for managing them. They still had to be the IT operations teams to kind of keep these things up and running 24/7. Their job got like three, four, five orders of magnitude more difficult. And at the same
Mhm.
time, because of the shift in a lot of companies' revenue to be sort of digital based revenue, the importance of their function was higher and higher and higher, right? They were keeping the company running. Um, and that's interesting to me in a way because that was made possible by SaaS. Like you couldn't have
Mhm.
gone through that kind of transformation if you were talking about traditional software, be that on-prem software, or even traditional software running in the cloud, because you would have needed the IT team to evaluate and procure and deploy and manage that. But with vendors taking over all of those sort of phases for you, making it
Mhm.
much easier, that's what enabled this explosion. Um, Now, that's like, let's say, the good news. And what I found interesting is that you think about these trends, cloud and microservices, CI/CD, it's just kind of universally accepted as these are positive, good trends for the world. Um, and I
Mhm.
think that's true, and it's moved the world forward, the technology world forward dramatically. But I'll say it kind of left the IT ops team behind. Like they got left
Mhm.
in the dust a little bit because their tools, their event management tools and other systems were like 10, 20-year-old on-prem kind of legacy systems. They just couldn't keep up with
Mhm.
this. Uh, so,
Mhm.
so frankly, that's why BigPanda exists, was to
Mhm.
come in and provide like kind of a step change improvement for those teams to help those businesses continue on their innovation journey and their efficiency and just continuing to scale. So that's like, I think that's like one angle.
And what about the importance of product itself? Has it changed? I mean, SaaS has
Yeah.
changed that equation that you go and you look at the product versus everything else that a software company does in on-premise
It's changed
model
entirely.
versus SaaS.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I think there's, I'll just think about my own career. I spent the first 10, 15 years building software that was sold on-prem in a perpetual business model or perpetual license. So what I needed to do is, get the current release out and then think of a bunch of really interesting new things to go put into the next release so that I could go and sell that to the customer. So like, okay, version 5 is out. Let me go save a bunch of really valuable features to version 6. And then I have like a conversation and negotiation with the customer to try to convince them that there's additional value. It's worth, several more millions of dollars to pay me for version 6. So it's like the perpetual model. Then you get the subscription model where you land somewhere and then you're like, okay, there's a renewal coming. Let's make sure the customer's happy. Hopefully they're going to expand a little bit as well. But you're driving features again for the sake of helping to drive that renewal. In a consumption model, it's very different. So the business model is different. Maybe I'll come to that here in a minute. But one of the biggest changes I see is the, the the impact that product has, and frankly, the responsibility that product has changed. So traditionally, in
Mhm.
an on-prem kind of software model, look, you have to design the product, you have to describe how to position it, you have to work with engineering to ship it, but then your job stops for a little bit, right? There's a big gap from the moment the software is released to the time that the customer achieves their value realization. It's not the product team that's making that happen. It's pre-sales and post-sales teams that are making that happen. And that's sometimes like 12, 18, 24 months later from the moment of release
Mhm.
to the moment of value realization.
Mhm.
And in SaaS, well, that goes away, that gap. Um, it should go away. It shrinks considerably. It's not that you don't have,
Mhm.
pre-sales and post-sales, but that gap goes where you release software, it's impacting your customers immediately, right?
Mhm.
There's like no place to
True.
hide, good for the good or for the bad. They're going to see the value or the lack thereof immediately. And that feedback's going to come right back to the product organization. The feature didn't work or it didn't deliver the value. So it's like one side of it. The
Mhm.
other side is it's literally your job to make that gap go away. This isn't just a thing that happens. You have to treat the pre-sales and post-sales, your sales teams as almost like users of your product. You have to design it to make it easier to be sold. And it's like, okay, well, I'm going to design a thing here that's going to enable a POV, and I'm going to design a thing here that's going to enable a proof of value is the term, POV, proof of value, or design a thing here that's going to help enable some magic sort of aha moment in the customer that the salesperson can easily help with that then takes them to the next thing. And then the renewals, they're all just built into the product and you want to show a forecast of how the usage is growing. So you have to think much more holistically about it. It's not just shipping software. You have to engineer and kind of product manage like the whole sales cycle from pre-sales to post-sales onboarding to even the renewal. That's just part of the product you have to design. That's different. That's you got to bring it for that. You got to bring your A game for this. I can't think of a better test for one's product capabilities than working in
Mhm.
enterprise SaaS right now. It's sort of where it's at from the best of the best. I think go there because of that problem I have. There's just so much responsibility. So I find that super interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's say, for example, I'm a company, I have a product very established. I have a lot of users. I've been, pretty successful, but it is on premise. And now I wanted to move that product and make it a SaaS product because of all of those benefits that you mentioned, both internally, externally, you know, from any aspect, right? Is it just a product change? Do you see it as more a business change on both sides? Does it, go back to the root and the DNA? And what are the factors that can be done better for the
Mhm.
companies when they make such a move to pay attention in order to lower the risk, in order to maximize their probably chance of success, in order to make that move from making the product now a SaaS product that used to be the same product. People still need it. The need hasn't gone away. It's just the company wants now to offer it as a SaaS.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, that is like the billion dollar or the trillion dollar question of our age is how do you transition to that? And frankly, not a lot of companies have done it. So I don't know that I've got like the answers here. I'll tell you kind of my experiences. If we think of who's like really successfully transitioned from on-prem to a cloud, cloud business model, Microsoft, Adobe, um, VMware to a certain extent. There's a few companies, but I can't think of a lot. Um, and I think the reason is it's incredibly hard. Like you have to have like basically the most disciplined, the best run company to possibly make this happen. And if you still have that at the moment you decide to do it, and then you make some dramatic, bold conviction that says we are now a cloud company, and all of your energy and focus and resources go into that, like that's the kind of thing it takes if you're a mature business. If you're still like super early and figuring things out, maybe it's less of a um, there's less established culture and practice and norms and customers and innovators dilemma kind of situations that are holding you back. Um, so I'll preface everything I say with that. Right? This is hard.
Oh.
Second is so imagine when you're first building something. You start with something small, and then you find your customers, and then they ask for a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. And 10 years later, you've got a fairly big, complicated product with a lot of expectations. And then someone comes to you, it's your sales team or your CEO, and says, now I want the cloud version of that. So one approach is to say, okay, well, let me think of this as a feature. Let me get out my pen and paper. I'm going to write a PRD. Well, what would it mean to go take this thing and run it on AWS? You could think of it like a feature. And this is the wrong way to do it. You need to start over. You need to start
Mhm.
says, okay, well, first off, if you just want to get to the cloud as quickly as possible, you should go with some kind of a lift and shift thing. Make your software run in the cloud somehow with a lift and shift kind of model, and maybe like you can play defense, you can buy yourself a couple of years there, and some customers will stay with you throughout it. That won't last for long, but you can have a version that if they can kind of stick with what they've invested in your stack, whatever it happens to be, but now it runs in the cloud of their choosing instead of in their own data center, like you'll get some mileage out of that. But when you really want to build a SaaS product, honestly, I would start over. I would start with, well, what is the value
Mhm.
proposition? How am I going to land new customers? And don't build for your most sophisticated customer. They will mislead you. They will tell you, I need
Mhm.
all of these features, but by the way, now that you're running the cloud, I need all these extra high-end security features and DR and other sorts of things. And if you compare yourself to what a startup would be doing that's trying to solve the same problem, they would never build those features in year one. Those would be features they
Mhm.
would build in year 7 or 8 when they have so much momentum in the marketplace and they have so much experience and success that they can kind of start to go up the market. But everyone that starts in SaaS, they don't start with your high-end Fortune 100 federal kind of customers. They start with small, mid-sized kind of companies. They get a lot of traction. They optimize for how can I deliver some amount of value as quickly as possible and as repeatably as possible. And that's just not how the on-prem model works. That wasn't, even if you did that maybe 10 years ago, that's probably not where you were now when you started this transition.
Mhm.
So I guess the lesson I would try to say is start over. Don't try to port everything you've got and just like treat it like a feature to like make it SaaS, check. You want to start to think from the beginning, go back to first principles. What would a startup be doing right now? Because that's your
Yeah.
competition. Somebody says, I think I can do this better as a startup than that sort of more more established but kind of legacy-minded company might be able to do.
Yeah, no, great points made here. Number one, it's not a feature, it's architectural change. So you have to start over. Don't think of it as I will add something in 3 months. But also, the point that you mentioned, I just wanted to better understand from your perspective when you say start over the product or start over the business. Because some of the points that you just mentioned, it goes beyond the product, like starting with customers that are smaller. That's wrong to go with a new product and start with the most complicated product, sorry, with the most complex and most sophisticated kind of situations and customers, because then you end up, as you said and rightfully pointed out, that you start with the requirements that are tough to do and is not required.
Hmm.
Honestly, I mean, at the start you don't need to have the most sophisticated security model. If you're a startup, if you're a new product, if you're a new business, you have that luxury to start with a smaller, simpler use cases and then grow up in some years in the right way. But if you are existing company with existing customers with a lot of those, you may just mislead yourself and go to your best customers and then put the requirement and then go to SaaS, and then
Yeah.
that is a product right off the bat to a very big challenge, maybe mission impossible, something like that. So but how do you see it? Is it really a restarting and starting new product, or it sometimes it's about really starting a new business maximizes your chance? Just
Yeah.
separate that brand, give yourself that kind of option that this brand, the expectation from this is not that much. Go with the new brand, set the expectation at the right level, bring customers and grow with them.
I think you're spot on. Um, Whether you literally start a new brand or not, um, I don't know that I have a strong opinion there. I could see the pros and the cons. But what I will say is internally, at least, you should think of it as starting a new business, a new company, perhaps, if you will, because the mindset and the culture and the systems is all different. What would this startup be thinking about? What would they be doing? Um, it reminds me a little bit of the series of books, the business management books from Jeffrey Moore, kind of
Mhm.
from Crossing the Chasm, which was his sort of first in the series, to Zone to Win, which is I think the seventh one in the series. And what I like about them is Crossing the Chasm provides like this business framework for the startup. Okay, when you're trying to attack somebody else's business or disrupt something, well, how do you think about it? And you should really know that because a lot of startups are thinking that way. Zone to Win, on the other hand, says, what if you're the established business and you're trying to catch a new wave or create a new line of business that could really be meaningful? The threshold he uses is 10%. How can you create something that would be 10% of total revenue? And how do you focus on that? How do you organize your company and your business, and depending on whether you're playing offense, and you're just trying to create something brand new, or you're playing defense. You're being attacked, and your on-prem business is under attack from startups, and now you want to go on defense. How could you neutralize the competition, et cetera? Um, and his guidelines are like treat it like its own new company and focus all of your energy and attention on that new thing. And you have to kind of squeeze the resources off of that existing business. And that's both from an engineering perspective, and a product perspective, and a sales perspective. And you got to incentivize the marketing team and the sales team to focus on that. And they're going to be really inefficient. You don't have any of those efficiencies of scales or brand recognition or that renewal power or anything like that to help with that. It's still going to be working against you, which is why it's most important that you really kind of focus on this as the P1. And it's like this has to be the CEO's number one job, kind of morning, noon, and night. Um, it's fascinating. And having been at companies kind of at both ends of that, I think that's right. I don't think you could underestimate how much of a transition this is going to be and how much focus it would take. and how holistic it would be. Just the sales incentive. If you get into you know a profitable, high revenue on-prem business, and you've got some of your larger customers that are expanding rapidly. They're doubling their annual spend with you because their business is exploding. But then you're also losing 20-30% of your customers kind of every year that have shifted off and gone off to the next generation of technology and the startups. Now you're in a renewals business, and you either
Mm.
accept that and you dig in and you say, well, I'm going to hold on to this thing for all that I can, or you do something that helps manage that renewals business, but you treat it as a fund. You treat it as a way of funding your emerging business, and you got to go pick one emerging business and treat it like a startup, and don't forget your startup days, from a product, from an engineering, from a growth hacking, from a sales perspective.
Yeah, yeah, and then there are, and that explains well why it's so difficult to reinvent yourself, right? So as a company, as a business, I mean, it's just not super easy. As you said, we don't have a lot of good examples. We have a few, maybe considering, all of the stories we hear, and it's a huge risk. And in our domain, in analytic world, we have seen it. We have seen some companies trying to reinvent themselves, and some companies, maybe even if they are massive, they are multi-billion dollar companies. Tableau is a good example. Maybe at one point they had the options: should we reinvent ourselves, or should we, be acquired by a bigger company and say, let's not doing it and not go to the next chapter. And it's tough. So at that point, the wise choice normally, I would say, I have seen more often in the market is, you are pretty established. Let's, not really, at that point, take the risk to reinvent yourself and then mess up everything that you have built so far, and all of the customer base and users and legacy system that you have put in place.
Yeah.
But you have to accept at that point that the new world is changing, and it's just, maybe a slow kind of growth or no growth, or sometimes even, we are just slowly just um, going to sunset, but that may take
Right.
a long time.
And I've heard the term a J curve, and I think that's an interesting model. That, like, if you accept that, if you accept, like, look, our revenue might go down for a little while, but we're going to let it go down, and intentionally, don't be surprised by it. Investors, employees, salespeople, we're going to do that somewhat intentionally because we're focused on this transition. Now, that's really hard to do, to have that discipline, especially if you're a public company. But frankly, even if you've been, like, acquired by private equity, like, you know they're treating that almost like a loan, and it's very unnerving to see revenue start to fall in that way. But, like, that's gonna probably happen. You would have to be really not only a legacy company, but a very high performing kind of legacy company, having a legacy business, if you were going to transition that without some form of a J curve. So I think, you know, open your eyes to that and expect it, and be transparent with all of your shareholders and employees. But it speaks more to the need to go through it. And if at all possible, if you see this thing coming, fix it before you go public. I think the moment you go public is very difficult to then go do a transition, right? This is disruptive, and it's risky, and it's scary, and you want to be private at that time, venture-backed private, ideally at that time. And if that's what matters most to you, and you're doing some sort of business model transformation, SaaS aside, that's both a technology transformation and a business transformation. But any kind of business transformation, I think, is sort of similar. So, I'll give you an example at my current company, BigPanda, uh, venture-backed, private company. We're in the process of embarking on a transformation to go from a subscription revenue model to usage-based. It's
Mhm.
going to be impactful. It's going to be hard. It's going to be tricky. Our customers are already asking for it, so I know there's demand in the market for it. but it's going to mess with our books for a little while. So we need to get through that now. And there's sort of no thought of like, let's go public until we get on the other side of that kind of a thing. And I think that's the right thing to do. I would hate to go public and then say, okay, which transformations do we need to go embark on now? Who's at our heels trying to disrupt us, et cetera. So you get it done as early as you can.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. Well, there are many other topics we can just branch out from here and go. But before I go further, I would like to ask you if you could tell us a little bit about the event that I know is coming, the upcoming event at BigPanda. If you could explain it a little bit, so
Yeah,
there might be some interest
yeah. So there's an
here as
event that Big Panda organizes. Let's say it's not our event. We think of it as a community event. It's called Resolve. It's a annual event. It's coming up on May 18th, virtual event, and it's basically an IT ops community event. So it's us
well.
trying to work with our customers and other partners and members of the community to bring them together to create a conversation, create a movement from kind of traditional IT ops to what we refer to as AI ops or AI-based IT operations. So the theme this year is the rise of AI ops, and we have a number of customers and partners that will be speaking and talking about kind of how do you get started, what does success look like, best practices and tips. You can register at bigpanda.io/resolve. And if you're out there listening and you have an IT operations team leader, send them. I think they'd find it fascinating to listen in. I myself will be moderating a panel that includes a couple of sort of venture capitalists and some financial analysts and some journalists as well. So I'm very much looking forward to it. It's just a few weeks from now, and I think it's a great way of kind of bringing this community together that kind of hasn't had a forum or a voice in the past, and we're hoping to use this to do that. And we've been very successful the last couple of years with this event.
So when would be the date then for this
May
event this
18th,
year? May 18th. Okay, great. And it's virtual, so people can join it from around the world.
exactly.
Okay, fantastic. You already mentioned a book, but I wonder if you have some recommendations for other books or you wanted to explain about uh, the same. But the reason I asked for the books, I think that one of the, first of all, it's hard to imagine, but really, Internet Zero was really when the print machine was invented. So we did not have really a good way to just communicate and distribute the information before we had the print machine in 1500. So
Hmm.
that was Internet Zero. It's very important. It's still very important. When we have books, we can just share our experience with other people. It has not gone away even in internet age. And then of course now we have Internet 1 and 2 and Web 3 now coming, that all of those accelerates the information distribution, but it's still we rely very much on version 0, that are really books that people write, share their experience that they have gained across, many years. Somebody might just summarize all the lifetime experience into 100 pages.
Hmm.
So that's definitely like a miracle. We can really read and, get smarter. So definitely books are the most important still, for us, especially, in the software product technology that is relatively new, and then we need to share our experience with each other so we all can do much better and serve our customers as users better. So with that said, um, I appreciate if you could share
Mm.
a book or some with our audience.
Yeah, Armand, thank you for that perspective. I like the way you kind of described it, the importance of it, the significance of books. Um, I'll say I struggle sometimes to find the time for reading. I think everyone does in kind of a busy modern world. Um, so I do a lot of audiobooks, and there's
Mhm.
good things and bad things about that. One is I have more time, whether it's commuting or working out or something like that. I have more time for it. The bad things is some of the really best books give you lots of ideas. Especially you read some sort of business framework book like Jeffrey Moore's books, or kind of career roadmap and management books like Patty Azzarello's books, they give you a bunch of good ideas. And I find myself, I'll be like running and constantly setting myself reminders using Siri. Siri, remind me in 2 hours to think about the blah 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 or whatever. Um, but it's just a funny way of trying to get that. But to your point, the concept of always searching for frameworks and wisdom of others to enable you to go faster and learn from where they struggled, it's just so powerful. And I don't know why, but there's just a lot of people that don't necessarily do that. There's a notion that you kind of finish your learning and your education sometime in your early 20s, and then from there on out, it's like doing. Let's just focus on doing the work as opposed to continuing learning and maintaining that growth mindset. And certainly I have struggled with that in the past as well. A lot better as of late. And there's I mentioned the Jeffrey Moore books, but I'll add Patty Azzarello's books as well. She has two that I know of at least. One is called Rise, and it's sort of three practical steps to taking a hold of your own career and launching yourself on an upward trajectory. Sometimes people will come to me and say, "Hey, what's my path to?" And then they'll mention like a title that's like one or two levels above where they are now, and it's like they're coming to me to give them that answer. And I just send them Patty's book. I'm like, read Rise. It'll tell you what to do. Follow the frameworks there. It'll tell you you got to do better, then you got to look better, and then you connect better. That's how the book is organized. And it's got like an amazing amount of wisdom kind of packed in there. And it also says it's on you. It's your responsibility to do these things. Others will help you along the way, but you got
Mhm.
to be a self-starter in this area. So it kind of turns the conversation back around. If I'm honest, I read the book a couple of years ago. I got about a third of the way through. Really stressed me out. There was too much wisdom in there, and I wasn't ready for maybe all of that, so I paused it. I spent about a year and a half doing better, following its guidance, sort of loosely. I read it again a couple of years later, and I was like, okay, I feel like I'm good. I finished the book, and then I went to our next book, which is interesting. It's called Move, and it's about guiding an organization through a transformation. How do you do that? How do you lead a company? How do you move the company through some transformation, which is hard, and everybody wants to conspire against it and that kind of stuff? And again, I found very valuable frameworks uh, provided in there.
Thank you very much for sharing those. Definitely appreciate it. And thank you so much, Fred, for joining us again. And I hope to see you and speak with you again at this show as well as in other occasions. It's a small world after all. It's a tech community. We are 1% of the whole community. We are software builders and inside the software world. So thanks again, and hope to see you again soon.
Absolutely. Same to you, Armand. I really enjoyed speaking with you today. Take care, and I hope to see you soon.